In the history of war, we remember the moments that explode into fire and headlines. We remember the admirals, the pilots, and the grand strategies. But sometimes, the most decisive battles aren't fought on the bridge or in the sky. They're fought below the waterline in the dark, where steel bends and a handful of men decide whether a ship, and perhaps a war, lives or dies. This is the story of one of those moments. By the summer of 1942, the Pacific War was balanced on a knife's edge. America was short on carriers, short on pilots, and dangerously short on time. Following the brutal battles of the Coral Sea and Midway, only a few precious flat-tops remained to hold the line against the Imperial Japanese Navy, and one ship CV-6, the USS Enterprise, the legendary Big E, carried more weight than steel alone could bear. She was more than a ship. She was the symbol of American resolve. On August 31st, south of the Solomon Islands, the Enterprise was a city at sea, alive with the noise of aircraft, the smell of oil and paint, and the constant motion of thousands of sailors. Then, it happened. Not an explosion you hear, but one you feel, a deep, violent shudder that rips through the entire vessel. A Japanese torpedo had found its mark, punching a hole below the waterline where the armor is thinnest. Tools flew from racks, men were thrown against bulkheads, and a dreaded call echoed through the passageways, flooding. Flooding port side. Water roared into the ship's guts, lights flickered and died, and chaos threatened to take hold. In Damage Control Central, the reports were grim: flooded compartments, loss of steering control, spreading fires. Any other carrier, by any sane doctrine, would slow, stop, and withdraw from the fight to save itself. But the Enterprise was not any other carrier, and on board was a man who didn't follow the book. His name was Samuel T. Haines, a chief shipwright in his 50s. He wasn't a pilot or an admiral. His command wasn't on the bridge, it was in the steel guts of the ship. While others moved away from the danger, Haines moved toward it, wading into the rising, oily water. His authority came from 30 years of knowing how ships are built, and more importantly, how they fail. When he reached the breach, the sight was terrifying. Steel was peeled inward like a can opener had been taken to the hull. Water poured in with relentless force. A young sailor, his face pale with fear, looked at the chief and asked, "Can we save her?" Haines didn't answer right away. He studied the torrent, the twisted metal, the groaning frame of the ship. The moth was brutal. The flooding was faster than the pumps could handle. By all accounts, the Enterprise should already be retreating to the rear for extensive repairs, leaving the Marines on Guadalcanal dangerously exposed. But retreat wasn't in Haines's vocabulary. He slammed a hand on a bent steel beam, his decision made. "Get me plate." He roared over the din. "Anything flat? Anything thick? We're closing this hole." There were no blueprints for this kind of repair at sea, under combat conditions. There was only instinct, experience, and sheer desperation. What followed was a masterclass in improvisation. Men dragged scrap steel through flooded corridors. Welding torches hissed to life, their sparks fizzing out as they touched the seawater. They were trying to weld underwater, a task that shouldn't have been possible with the equipment they had. But they had to try. A welder would lay a bead of molten steel, only to have it extinguished by the surge. Again and again they tried until, miraculously, a weld caught. Then another. Slowly, painfully, they began to stitch the wound closed. It was a duel between the welders and the Pacific Ocean itself. The men worked waist deep in cold, dark water, their muscles screaming in protest. The pumps, once losing the battle, started to gain ground as the inflow of water lessened. A brief, ragged cheer went up, but there was no time for celebration. This wasn't a permanent solution. It was a delay. It was buying time. Haines gathered the ship's officers, sketching his plan on a chalkboard with dripping hands. The engineering officer was skeptical. "Chief, she needs a drydock. Weeks, maybe months." Haines shook his head. "Weeks we don't have. The Marines on Guadalcanal don't have weeks." The room fell silent. Everyone knew the stakes. If the Enterprise left the line, the battle for Guadalcanal, and perhaps the entire Solomon Islands campaign, could be lost. "I can keep her fighting," Haines stated, his voice raw with exhaustion but firm with conviction. "Days, maybe a week." The captain had a choice: follow protocol and risk losing the campaign, or trust the grizzled shipwright and risk losing his ship and his career. He looked at Haines, saw the certainty in his eyes, and gave a single nod. The decision was made. If it worked, history would bend. The duel continued. Through the night, under the eerie red glow of battle lights, Haines and his exhausted crew fought to keep their patch from failing. At one point, a seam gave way and water surged in anew, nearly dragging a sailor away in the torrent. Others pulled him back to safety. Haines looked at the new rupture, the ocean trying to reclaim its prize, and let out a single, gruff laugh. "All right," he grunted. "Now she's talking to us." This was no longer just a repair. It was a conversation with the ship itself. They brought in thicker plates, bolted them directly to the ship's frame, and welded braces inside the hull to reinforce their work. They were essentially rebuilding a section of the ship from the inside out while it was still at sea, still in a war zone. And then came the dawn. Up on the flight deck, the familiar roar of engines split the air as the Enterprise began launching aircraft. She was back in the fight. Below decks, the damaged control parties paused, listening to the groans and creaks of their wounded ship, praying their welds would hold under the stress of combat maneuvers. And they did. Against every prediction, the Enterprise fought on. Enemy bombers swarmed, and near misses from Japanese bombs shook the hull violently. One of the patch seams split open again, steam hissing from the breach. But Haines was already there, shouting, "Plate, now." Sparks flew, the weld sealed, and the leak was contained. A carrier never designed to fight while broken was doing exactly that, held together by little more than scrap metal and a sheer, bloody-minded will of its crew. The cost of this victory was paid in burns, exhaustion, and nerves stretched to the breaking point. Men collapsed where they stood, their bodies finally giving out. Samuel Haines, after hours of non-stop work, finally sat for a moment, removing his helmet to wipe the sweat and grime from his face. Human will can hold what steel cannot, but not forever. A message came down from the bridge. An initial assessment estimated 3 weeks of minimum repair time in a proper shipyard. Haines read the slip of paper, crumpled it in his fist, and tossed it aside. "Tell them," he said, "we're not done yet." Weeks later, the USS Enterprise sailed into Pearl Harbor under her own power. Dock workers and naval engineers stared in disbelief at the monstrous, ugly patch welded to her side. An inspector, looking at the crude but effective work, simply asked, "Who did this?" The repairs would never pass a peacetime inspection. They were rough, unorthodox, and broke 100 regulations. But they hadn't been meant to pass inspection. They were meant to win a battle. And they had. That patch had kept America's most vital carrier in the fight when it was needed most, erasing weeks of lost time from the war effort. Haines himself helped his crew cut away their own handiwork, preparing the Big E for a proper fix. The USS Enterprise would go on to earn more battle stars than any ship of her war, becoming a legend of the Pacific. But beneath the thunder of her guns and the roar of her planes, beneath the headlines and the medals, victory was forged in the dark, below the waterline. It was forged in a moment when history turned not on a grand strategy, but on a simple weld, holding under pressure thanks to the courage and ingenuity of men like Samuel T. Haines. Sometimes the greatest victories are the ones nobody ever sees. Thanks for watching. If you found this story as incredible as I did, make sure to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell for more tales of unsung heroism.